The galaxy had been peaceful for 300 years. 12 different alien races worked together in something called the United Galactic Council. They solved problems by talking, not fighting. The Zephyrians could read minds. The Nixari looked like living crystals. The Corvallans lived in water but could breathe air too. All of them were smart and used advanced technology to keep peace across thousands of star systems. Dr. Kes Navarone was a Zephyrian who studied old ruins and dead civilizations. She had spent her whole career looking for clues about a species that appeared in ancient stories on many different worlds. These beings were called humans. Most other scientists thought humans were just made-up stories like fairy tales. But Kes believed they had been real. The old stories said humans were strange creatures. They walked on two legs like some other species, but they had no special powers. They could not read minds. They had no thick skin or shells to protect them. They were not very strong or fast compared to other races. Yet the ancient texts called them gods of war and said other species had feared them. Kes found this impossible to believe. How could weak creatures with no special abilities become so feared? The stories made no sense. They claimed humans could survive almost anywhere. They said humans fought with simple weapons, but somehow won battles against enemies with better technology. The myths talked about something called creativity that made humans unpredictable and dangerous. On a remote mining world called Tertius 7, Kes made a discovery that changed everything. Her team was digging through ruins that were thousands of years old. Deep underground, they found a sealed chamber. Inside was a machine that looked like a sleeping pod. The pod was still working, powered by an energy source that Kes had never seen before. Her equipment said the chamber was over 10,000 years old. Through the clear window of the pod, Kes could see a figure inside. It looked like the descriptions of humans in the old stories. The being was about 2 meters tall with pale skin and dark hair on its head. It wore some kind of uniform that had faded symbols on it. Kes stared at the sleeping figure and wondered if she had found proof that humans were real. While studying the pod's controls, Kes accidentally pressed something that started a revival process. Lights began flashing and the pod made strange humming sounds. The figure inside began to move. Its eyes opened and looked directly at Kes. The eyes were bright blue, unlike anything she had ever seen. The being sat up slowly and looked around, the dig site with obvious intelligence. The creature spoke in a language that Kes's translator could not understand at first. After several minutes, the device adjusted and the words became clear. "How long was I asleep?" the being asked. Its voice was calm, but there was something in its tone that made Kes nervous. The being said its name was Jake Morrison. He claimed to be a lieutenant commander in something called the Human Colonial Defense Force. Jake explained that he had been put into the sleeping pod during what he called the Great Exodus. His people had been forced to leave their home world when it was dying. His ship had crashed on Tertius 7 and his crew had activated emergency sleep systems, hoping someone would find them someday. Jake told Kes that he was just one of thousands of humans scattered across the galaxy in hidden shelters. His people had been traveling between stars for centuries before the disaster that destroyed their homeworld. They had built colonies, research stations, and military bases throughout what was now Council space. Most had been forgotten during the Exodus. When Kes reported her discovery to the Galactic Council, most members were skeptical. A living human seemed impossible. Jake's claims about hidden human installations throughout their territory seemed even more unlikely. However, Jake knew things about old star maps and forgotten travel routes that he should not have known. More disturbing were his casual mentions of weapons and technologies that the Council had never heard of. Chancellor Vex Corvallan was the Council's top military advisor. He authorized a secret investigation into Jake's claims. What they found was alarming. There were dozens of human facilities still operating in empty space between star systems. Massive shipyards were hidden inside asteroid fields. Weapon platforms that had been sleeping for thousands of years were still fully functional and waiting for activation codes. Jake seemed confused by the Council's peaceful civilization. He talked about war like it was normal and natural. He spoke of conflicts that lasted for generations and military thinking that the Council species found incomprehensible. When council members showed him recordings of recent diplomatic meetings, Jake would ask strange questions like, what was their military objective? Or, how did they use their combat advantage? News of the human discovery was kept secret, but it reached the wrong ears anyway. The hegemony was a group of militant species that had been growing more aggressive toward council territories. They had been testing council defenses for months, looking for weaknesses while building a huge war fleet in the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. The discovery of a living human changed the hegemony's plans. If humans were real and possessed the legendary military abilities described in ancient texts, they could change the outcome of any future war. The hegemony decided to attack sooner, while the human threat was still small. Meanwhile, Jake had begun accessing old human communication networks using codes from his military service. The responses he received were troubling. Automated systems across the galaxy were reporting that human installations were detecting massive military buildups. Ancient defensive protocols were beginning to activate after 10,000 years of sleep. Jake tried to explain the situation to Dr. Navarone and the council representatives. His people had not been just refugees fleeing a dying world. They had been warriors fleeing from an enemy that had destroyed their home and killed billions of their kind. The same enemy that had driven humans into exile was still out there. And Jake believed they were coming back. The council members found Jake's warnings hard to believe. They had maintained peace for 3 centuries through diplomacy and careful negotiation. The idea of an enemy dedicated to total destruction seemed impossible to their way of thinking. War was something that happened when negotiations failed, not something that entire species planned for years or decades. But as Jake accessed more human systems, the evidence became undeniable. Hidden sensors throughout council space were detecting ship movements and military preparations on a scale that suggested an invasion force. The patterns matched tactical data in human military databases, data that was thousands of years old but still relevant. Dr. Navarone found herself caught between 2 different ways of thinking about the galaxy. The council believed in peace through understanding and cooperation. Jake and his people seemed to believe that peace was only possible when you were strong enough to defend it. Both sides thought they were right, but the approaching threat suggested that Jake's worldview might be more accurate. As automated human systems continued to wake up across the galaxy, Jake received more disturbing reports. The enemy that had destroyed Earth and forced humanity into exile had not disappeared. They had been waiting, growing stronger, and preparing for the day when they would finish what they had started. That day was almost here. The hegemony's advance. Scouts had already been detected at the edge of council space. Their main fleet would arrive soon, and when it did, the peaceful galaxy that the council had built would face its greatest test. The only question was whether the legendary gods of war would wake up in time to defend it. The attack came without warning. One moment, the council's largest shipyard at Proxima Station was peaceful and busy with construction work. The next moment, hundreds of enemy ships appeared from hyperspace like angry wasps from a disturbed nest. The hegemony fleet was massive and deadly, with weapons that cut through council defenses like hot knives through butter. Council forces had never seen anything like it. Their ships were built for exploration and long missions, not for fighting. Their crews had studied military history in school but had never actually fought in a real war. The attack was so fast and brutal that half of the council's active fleet was destroyed in just a few hours. The shipyards that had taken decades to build were turned into floating wreckage. Jake Morrison watched the battle reports with growing alarm. He recognized the tactical patterns from his military training, but the council's responses were all wrong. They were trying to defend fixed positions against an enemy that had clearly spent years preparing for this invasion. The council commanders were fighting the kind of war they understood, not the kind of war they were actually in. Dr. Navarone found Jake studying tactical displays in the research facility where he was being held. His face was grim as he watched the symbols representing council fleets disappear one by one. "Your people are brave," he told her, "but they're fighting this war like it's a disagreement between neighbors. This isn't a disagreement. This is extermination." Within 3 days, 3 major star systems had fallen to hegemony forces. The enemy wasn't just conquering territory, They were systematically destroying the Council's ability to fight back. They captured shipyards, eliminated supply depots, and targeted military academies where officers were trained. This was the kind of total warfare that Jake's people had learned to fight against, but it required resources and tactics that the Council didn't have. The Council leadership was desperate. Chancellor Corvalin contacted Dr. Navarone with an urgent request. They wanted Jake to access human military installations and provide intelligence about hegemony capabilities. Jake agreed to help, but he warned them that awakening human military systems after 10,000 years might have consequences nobody could predict. Using his command codes, Jake began reactivating human communication networks across the galaxy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Automated systems throughout Council space started reporting their status. Weapon platforms that had been disguised as asteroids for thousands of years came online. Shipyards hidden inside dead planets began powering up. Massive defensive installations built into space stations that the Council had been using for centuries revealed their true nature. The reports were incredible and frightening. Human military technology had been hiding in plain sight throughout Council territory. The Council had been living and working around weapon systems powerful enough to destroy entire fleets, never knowing they were there. Even more disturbing were reports from human personnel still sleeping in cryogenic pods, waiting for orders that had never come. Colonel Lisa Martinez was the first senior officer Jake successfully revived. She had been commanding a deep space reconnaissance unit when the Great Exodus began. Her first question after waking up wasn't about how long she had been asleep. She wanted to know about the tactical situation and what resources were available for mounting a defense. Martinez was a professional soldier in a way that shocked the Council observers. While Jake had been curious about the peaceful civilization that had developed during his sleep, Martinez focused entirely on military matters. She took one look at the invasion reports and immediately began establishing communication with other awakening human installations. The colonel quickly took charge of the human military response. She was disturbed by what she saw in the current conflict. The Council was fighting a war they couldn't win using strategies that would only delay their defeat. Worse, the enemy seemed to know exactly how Council forces would respond to different situations. As more human systems came online, the true scope of human military preparation became clear. For 10,000 years, automated systems had been monitoring galactic communications, learning languages, studying technological developments, and updating tactical databases with information about every species in the galaxy. The sleeping humans had been unconsciously preparing for exactly this kind of war. The hegemony advance continued despite increasing Council resistance. Intelligence reports revealed something that changed everything. The hegemony wasn't just a militant faction of various species. They were the military arm of an ancient empire that had been building strength in the darkness beyond the galaxy for thousands of years. Their goal wasn't conquest but complete extermination of all species that might threaten their dominance. Human reconnaissance platforms began providing intelligence that shocked both Jake and Martinez. The hegemony ships used technology and tactics that matched records in human military databases. The enemy formations, weapon signatures, and strategic patterns were all familiar. These weren't just any hostile aliens. They were the same species that had destroyed Earth and forced humanity into exile. The Devourers had returned, calling themselves the hegemony now, but they were the same enemy that had haunted human nightmares for 10,000 years. The war wasn't about territory or resources. It was the continuation of a conflict that had begun when Earth died, and now the Devourers intended to finish what they had started. This revelation changed everything for the awakening humans. Jake had been willing to help the Council as a matter of honor and gratitude. Martinez had been approaching the situation as a professional military problem, but now they understood that this was their war, the same war their ancestors had been fighting when they went into cryogenic sleep. Martinez began implementing protocols that had been developed during humanity's last stand at Earth. She activated sleeper cells throughout Council space and initiated production of human weapons and equipment. She also began training selected Council personnel in human military tactics, though the Council's diplomatic nature made them hesitant to fully embrace human methods of warfare. The first human warship to become operational was the UHS Defiance. For 10,000 years, it had been disguised as a mining station in an asteroid belt. When its systems came online, it immediately began hunting hegemony scouts in the outer system. Council observers were amazed by its capabilities. The ship had stealth technology that made it invisible to their sensors, weapons that could destroy enemy vessels with single shots, and tactical systems that seemed to predict enemy movements. The Defiance's first mission was a complete success. It destroyed an entire hegemony patrol squadron without taking any damage or even being detected. The enemy ships simply exploded one by one, with their crews never knowing what hit them. Council military leaders had never seen anything like it. As more human installations came online, the nature of the conflict began to change. Hegemony forces that had been advancing without opposition suddenly found themselves under attack by enemies they couldn't see or predict. Supply convoys disappeared without distress calls. Strategic installations were destroyed by weapons that left no traces. Scout ships sent to investigate never returned. The hegemony commanders were confused and angry. They had spent years studying Council military capabilities and had prepared countermeasures for every known tactic. But now, they were facing an enemy that didn't appear in any of their intelligence reports, using weapons and strategies that didn't match any known technology. Jake and Martinez watched the changing tactical situation with grim satisfaction. The hegemony had made the same mistake that many of humanity's old enemies had made. They had assumed that superior numbers and advanced technology would guarantee victory. They had not prepared for an enemy that fought with cunning, creativity, and a willingness to take risks that seemed insane to logical military minds. But the humans knew this was only the beginning. The hegemony had vast resources and would adapt quickly once they understood what they were facing. The real war was just starting, and it would require everything that humanity had learned about survival and warfare during their long exile among the stars. The war entered a new phase as human military knowledge began to change how the Council fought. Colonel Martinez set up a joint command structure that paired human tactical officers with Council fleet commanders. The goal was to share knowledge and coordinate operations, but the cultural differences caused immediate problems. Humans thought in terms of acceptable losses and strategic sacrifices, while Council species valued every individual life and wanted to avoid casualties at all costs. Captain Dan Rodriguez had recently been awakened from a military intelligence unit. He took charge of reconnaissance operations, and his methods shocked Council observers. Instead of diplomatic contact or technological surveillance, he launched secret infiltration missions deep into hegemony territory. Human operatives used stealth, technology, and psychological warfare techniques to destabilize hegemony command structures from within. The Council representatives watched in horror as Rodriguez explained his plans. His teams would capture enemy officers, interrogate them for information, then release them with false memories designed to create paranoia and distrust among hegemony commanders. Other operations involved sabotaging supply ships in ways that made it look like internal betrayal rather than enemy action. Dr. Navarone attended one of Rodriguez's briefings and was disturbed by what she heard. "You're not just fighting them," she told him afterward. "You're trying to drive them insane." Rodriguez nodded calmly. "Fear and confusion are weapons just like guns and bombs. Sometimes they're more effective because the enemy destroys itself. The hegemony responded to increased resistance by making their extermination protocols even more brutal. Entire star systems were targeted for complete destruction, with civilian populations eliminated to prevent future resistance. The cruelty of their tactics finally convinced even the most peaceful Council species that this war could only end with the complete defeat of one side or the other. Admiral Helen Barnes was the highest-ranking human officer successfully revived. She had been in command of humanity's home defense fleet during the final battle for Earth. Her first strategic briefing to the Council leadership was a harsh assessment of their situation. They were fighting an enemy that had spent thousands of years preparing for this war, using resources and tactics that the Council couldn't match with normal approaches. Barnes proposed a radical change in strategy based on human military philosophy. Instead of defending territory, they would target the hegemony's ability to sustain their war effort. This meant attacking supply lines, command structures, and industrial capacity, while using mobility and unpredictability to avoid major battles that favored hegemony numerical superiority. The council leaders were uncomfortable with Barnes's approach. It meant abandoning populations to enemy occupation and allowing the destruction of worlds that could be defended. But the alternative was the complete extinction of all council species, so they reluctantly agreed to let Barnes implement her strategy. The first major human-led operation was the destruction of the hegemony's primary shipyard complex in the Vega system. The facility was heavily defended and located deep in enemy territory. Using a combination of human stealth technology and council scientific expertise, a joint task force penetrated the shipyard's defenses and planted gravitational destabilization devices throughout its structure. Jake Morrison was part of the infiltration team. He had volunteered despite having no formal special operations training, arguing that his knowledge of human systems made him essential to the mission. Working alongside professional soldiers like Sergeant Amy Patterson, Jake learned firsthand what human military efficiency looked like in action. The team moved through the massive shipyard like ghosts, avoiding patrols and security systems while placing their devices at critical structural points. Patterson taught Jake how to move silently, how to disable guards without killing them, and how to remain calm under extreme pressure. "War isn't about being brave," she told him quietly as they worked. "It's about being smart and staying alive long enough to complete the mission." The destruction of the Vega shipyard was spectacular. The gravitational devices created a controlled collapse that formed a micro-black hole, consuming the entire facility and half of the hegemony's reserve fleet. The explosion was visible from neighboring star systems and sent a clear message that the enemy was no longer safe anywhere in the galaxy. The success of the Vega operation convinced reluctant council members to fully support human military leadership. More importantly, it demonstrated to the hegemony that their enemy had capabilities they hadn't anticipated. The war was no longer a simple conquest. It had become a struggle for survival against opponents who fought with methods the hegemony didn't understand. Human psychological warfare specialists led by Dr. Amy Patterson began implementing campaigns designed to undermine hegemony morale and command structure. Using captured communication systems and cultural analysis developed over 10,000 years of observation, they spread false information, created fake conflicts between enemy units, and exploited political divisions within hegemony leadership. Patterson's approach was methodical and ruthless. She studied enemy psychology like a scientist studying insects, identifying weaknesses and pressure points that could be exploited. Her teams would intercept enemy communications and insert subtle changes that made commanders distrust each other. They created false intelligence reports that led enemy fleets into traps or sent them to defend empty systems, while real attacks happened elsewhere. The hegemony's response was to increase the brutality of their occupation policies and accelerate their timeline for complete galactic sterilization. They began deploying weapons of mass destruction against civilian targets, hoping to force human and council forces into defensive positions that would neutralize their tactical advantages. Major Chris Thompson commanded a human special operations unit that led raids against hegemony research facilities to prevent the development of more devastating weapons. These missions revealed disturbing intelligence. The hegemony possessed detailed records of human military capabilities from their previous conflicts, and they had been developing specific countermeasures for anticipated human tactics. Thompson's discovery meant that the current conflict was not just a continuation of the ancient war between humans and devourers, but the culmination of 10,000 years of preparation on both sides. The hegemony had been planning for this moment since their victory at Earth, while humans had been unconsciously preparing through their dispersed military installations and automated systems. As both sides escalated their efforts, the war began. To affect the fundamental structure of the galaxy, hyperspace routes were disrupted by gravitational weapons. Star systems were evacuated or destroyed. Entire sectors became uninhabitable war zones. The conflict that had started as an invasion was becoming a battle that would determine the future of all galactic civilization. Intelligence reports indicated that the hegemony was preparing a final offensive designed to break the Joint Human Council resistance once and for all. They were gathering their remaining forces for simultaneous strikes against every major population center in Council space, planning to complete their extermination campaign in a single coordinated assault. Admiral Barnes realized that conventional defensive strategies wouldn't be sufficient to stop such a massive offensive. The human and Council forces would need to take enormous risks and use their most dangerous weapons if they hoped to survive the coming battle. She began preparing for what she privately called the most desperate gamble in galactic history. Representatives asked Barnes what she needed for the final battle. Her answer was simple but chilling. Everything. Every ship, every weapon, every person willing to fight, and the understanding that most of us won't survive to see victory. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake Morrison looked at the tactical displays showing enemy fleet movements and felt a familiar cold certainty settle in his chest. This was what his people had always known would come eventually, the final test of whether humanity deserved to survive, or whether the universe belonged to those who consumed everything in their path. The preparations began immediately. Across the galaxy, human installations that had remained hidden for millennia began revealing themselves and preparing for the ultimate battle. The gods of war were fully awakening, and the galaxy would never be the same. The hegemony's final attack began with the simultaneous assault on 12 major star systems. Each attack was led by massive Dreadnought-class warships that had been kept in reserve throughout the entire war. The scale of the offensive was beyond anything the Council had ever faced. Entire fleets of enemy vessels emerged from hyperspace, supported by planet-killer weapons and deadly viral agents designed to eliminate all organic life. Admiral Barnes had been expecting this moment. She immediately implemented Protocol Omega, a human military doctrine that had never been used in actual combat. All human military installations throughout the galaxy received simultaneous activation orders. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Tens of thousands of human military personnel came online at the same time, supported by automated weapons platforms that had been hidden throughout Council space for thousands of years. The galaxy suddenly came alive with human military activity. Weapon systems that had been disguised as space debris began targeting enemy ships. Hidden bases inside asteroids opened their blast doors and launched fighter squadrons. Space stations that the Council had been using for peaceful purposes revealed massive gun batteries and defensive systems. Captain Kelly Williams led the defense of New Geneva, one of the most important Council worlds under attack. Her task force included 3 human stealth destroyers and a Council fleet of 30 vessels. When the hegemony assault force arrived with over 200 warships, the Council commanders wanted to evacuate immediately. Williams convinced them to trust human tactical doctrine and implement a defensive strategy that seemed like suicide. The Battle of New Geneva became one of the most studied conflicts in military history. Williams used human hit-and-run tactics combined with Council shield technology to create a defensive strategy that confused and frustrated the enemy. Her ships would appear to retreat, drawing enemy forces into carefully prepared traps. They would expose valuable targets to enemy fire, then use those same targets as bait to destroy pursuing ships. The key to Williams' success was unpredictability. Human commanders would execute maneuvers that seemed illogical or self-destructive, but which consistently resulted in tactical advantages that the hegemony couldn't counter. They would attack when outnumbered, retreat when they held advantages, and sacrifice valuable assets to gain psychological leverage over enemy commanders. Williams's force managed to destroy nearly half of the attacking fleet, while suffering minimal losses. Council observers couldn't understand how it was possible. The mathematics of the battle didn't make sense according to traditional military theory, but Williams operated according to human principles that treated warfare as much psychology as technology. Similar battles were fought throughout Council space as human military leaders demonstrated the capabilities that had made their species legendary. They didn't just fight with superior technology or greater numbers. They fought with an understanding of warfare psychology that allowed them to predict and manipulate enemy decisions. General Kevin Murphy coordinated the overall defensive campaign from a mobile command center that stayed ahead of hegemony hunter-killer groups. His approach to warfare continued to shock Council observers. He would deliberately sacrifice valuable assets to gain tactical advantages, allow enemy forces to capture strategically worthless positions to overextend their supply lines, and use human casualties as psychological weapons against enemy commanders. Murphy's strategy seemed cruel and wasteful to Council military leaders, but it was devastatingly effective. Every sacrifice served a purpose, every retreat was planned, and every victory was designed to set up the next phase of the campaign. The hegemony found themselves winning individual battles but losing the overall war as their resources were systematically depleted. The hegemony discovered they were fighting an enemy that broke all their tactical assumptions. Human forces would retreat when they held advantages, attack when they were outnumbered, and expose critical assets to draw enemies into carefully prepared traps. Worse, human commanders seemed to anticipate hegemony tactical decisions with uncanny accuracy, as if they possessed detailed intelligence about enemy command structures. Jake Morrison found himself assigned to a reconnaissance unit operating behind enemy lines. Working with Sergeant Rodriguez and Dr. Patterson, he learned to think like a soldier rather than a scientist. The experience was terrifying and exhilarating. Every mission required him to make life and death decisions based on incomplete information and pure instinct. During one mission to gather intelligence on enemy troop movements, Jake's team was discovered by a hegemony patrol. Instead of running or hiding, Rodriguez led them in a direct assault that eliminated the entire enemy unit within minutes. Jake watched in amazement as professional human soldiers moved with deadly efficiency, coordinating their actions without spoken words. "How did you know we could win?" Jake asked afterward. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "I didn't know. But I knew that if we ran, they would call for reinforcements and hunt us down. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the safest." Jake was beginning to understand why other species had called humans gods of war. The turning point came when human intelligence officers discovered the location of the hegemony's Supreme Command facility. It was a massive space station, hidden in the gravitational shadow of a black hole in the galactic core. The facility was protected by the most powerful defensive fleet the hegemony possessed, and its destruction would cripple their ability to coordinate the final offensive. Admiral Barnes assembled a strike force unlike anything seen in galactic history. The mission required volunteers who understood that survival was impossible. The black hole's gravitational effects would prevent any escape once the attack began. Every human officer in the fleet volunteered, but Barnes selected only those with the specific skills needed for what she called a one-way trip to legend. Commander Rick Davis led the strike force aboard the UHS Vengeance, a human battleship that had been upgraded with experimental weapons developed during the current war. His crew consisted of volunteers from both human and council forces, united by the understanding that their sacrifice could end the war and save billions of lives throughout the galaxy. Davis had been a civilian engineer when the war began, awakened from cryogenic sleep to help repair damaged human installations. He had volunteered for military service and proven himself in several smaller operations. Now he found himself commanding the most important mission in human history. The assault on the hegemony command station was a masterpiece of human military planning. The strike force used the black hole's gravitational effects to achieve impossible speeds and maneuverability, turning the environment that protected the enemy facility into a weapon against it. Davis's ships dove toward the black hole at velocities that should have torn them apart, using gravitational slingshot effects to build momentum for their attack. The battle was brief, but decisive. The Vengeance and her escort ships emerged from the black hole's shadow like avenging angels, striking the command station before its defenders could react. The human weapons, enhanced by the extreme gravitational environment, punched through enemy shields and armor like they were made of paper. Davis managed to transmit a final message before his ship was consumed by the black hole's gravity. "Tell them we finished the mission. Tell them the gods of war kept their promise." The command station exploded in a flash of light that was visible across half the galaxy, taking with it most of the hegemony's senior military leadership and their strategic coordination capabilities. The destruction of their command structure caused immediate chaos throughout hegemony forces. Without central coordination, their final offensive collapsed as individual fleet commanders began making conflicting decisions. Human and council forces launched immediate counterattacks, exploiting the confusion to destroy enemy formations that had been scattered by the loss of command authority. Within days, the war's momentum had completely reversed. Hegemony forces that had been advancing toward final victory found themselves cut off from supplies and reinforcements, hunted by human-led task forces that had spent months learning their tactical patterns. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia discovered what it meant to be prey instead of predators. The war ended not with a peace treaty or surrender ceremony, but with the complete elimination of the hegemony as a fighting force. Human and council forces systematically hunted down every remaining enemy installation throughout the galaxy. The last hegemony stronghold was destroyed 6 months after the fall of their command station, ending a conflict that had threatened to consume all galactic civilization. The final phase became known as the Great Hunt. Human military units that had learned to fight like predators now turned their skills toward tracking down scattered enemy remnants. Captain Rodriguez led pursuit teams that followed fleeing hegemony ships across multiple star systems, never letting them rest or regroup. Sergeant Patterson coordinated intelligence networks that identified hidden enemy bases and supply caches. Jake Morrison participated in the assault on the last major hegemony facility, a research station hidden in the Outer Rim territories. Working alongside professional soldiers who had become his friends and teachers, he helped capture the scientists and military officers who had developed the biological weapons intended to sterilize entire worlds. It was fitting that a human, who had started the war as a sleeping legend, would help end it as a living warrior. The victory belonged to the joint Human Council forces, but everyone understood that human military leadership had been the deciding factor. Without their tactical knowledge, psychological warfare techniques, and willingness to make enormous sacrifices, the peaceful galactic civilization would have been completely destroyed within months of the initial invasion. In the aftermath of the war, the Galactic Council faced the challenge of integrating a species that had proven itself capable of warfare on a scale that other civilizations could barely understand. The humans who had awakened to fight showed no interest in conquest or political power, but their very presence changed the fundamental balance of galactic politics. Admiral Barnes was offered the position of Supreme Military Commander for the reformed Galactic Council. She declined the honor, preferring to oversee the gradual awakening of the remaining human population still in cryogenic suspension. The process would take years, as millions of humans throughout the galaxy needed to be revived and integrated into a civilization that had evolved dramatically since their exile. The awakening process was carefully managed to prevent cultural shock. Humans emerging from thousands of years of sleep found themselves in a galaxy that was both familiar and alien. The basic physics and technology were recognizable, but the political and social structures were completely different from what they remembered. Jake Morrison became the unofficial ambassador between humanity and the Council species. His experiences during the war had taught him that his people could no longer exist in isolation. They were part of a galactic community, whether they chose to be or not. The question was, how to maintain their unique identity and capabilities while contributing to a peaceful civilization. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was a human xenobiologist awakened during the war. She led efforts to establish formal diplomatic relations between humanity and the various council species. Her work revealed that humans had developed perspectives on cooperation and conflict that other species found both fascinating and disturbing. Humans could form alliances with former enemies, wage total war against existential threats, and then return to peaceful cooperation with remarkable ease. The integration process wasn't without difficulties. Many humans awakening from their long sleep found the peaceful galactic civilization difficult to understand or accept. Some requested to return to cryogenic suspension rather than adapt to a world without the constant threat of warfare that had defined their species' recent history. Others threw themselves into civilian pursuits with the same intensity they had brought to military service. Colonel Martinez established the Human Cultural Preservation Institute to help awakening humans adapt to their new circumstances while maintaining their essential identity. The Institute became a bridge between human military culture and galactic civilian society, teaching both sides how to coexist without losing their fundamental characteristics. The Institute's work was complicated by the fact that many council species were now curious about human military methods. They wanted to understand how a species with no natural advantages had become so effective at warfare. Martinez found herself teaching courses on tactical thinking, strategic planning, and combat psychology to alien military officers who had never experienced real conflict. The war had revealed that humans possessed something that other galactic species lacked: the ability to embrace conflict as a path to peace. They could wage war with devastating effectiveness while maintaining clear objectives and moral boundaries. This made them invaluable as peacekeepers and mediators in disputes between other species. Human installations throughout Council space were gradually converted to civilian purposes, but their existence had permanently changed the strategic balance of the galaxy. Every species now understood that humans possessed capabilities that could defend or destroy entire civilizations. That knowledge influenced every diplomatic and political decision made in the post-war period. The legends that had described humans as gods of war were replaced by new stories that were equally remarkable. Humans became known as the species that could end conflicts that others couldn't resolve, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through their unique understanding of conflict psychology and strategic thinking. General Murphy established a new military doctrine based on human and council cooperation. His approach emphasized prevention over destruction, using the threat of human military capabilities to discourage aggression while relying on council diplomatic skills to resolve disputes peacefully. The combination proved remarkably effective at maintaining galactic stability. 5 years after the war's end, the galaxy had achieved a level of stability that surpassed even the 3 centuries of peace that had preceded the hegemony invasion. The presence of humans in the galactic community served as both a deterrent to potential aggressors and a resource for resolving disputes before they escalated to warfare. Captain Williams became the commander of the new Joint Peacekeeping Force, a military organization that combined human tactical expertise with council technological capabilities. Her forces were deployed to trouble spots throughout the galaxy, often resolving conflicts simply by arriving and demonstrating that the galactic community was prepared to defend peace with overwhelming force. The transformation wasn't complete without controversy. Some council species worried that human influence was making galactic civilization too militaristic. Others argued that human methods were necessary to prevent future conflicts like the hegemony invasion. The debate continued in council chambers and academic institutions throughout the galaxy. Dr. Navarone published a comprehensive study of human military psychology that became required reading in diplomatic academies throughout council space. Her work helped other species understand that human warfare capabilities were not the result of aggression or cruelty, but of a deep commitment to protecting what they valued most. The final human to be awakened from cryogenic suspension was Admiral Robert Hayes, who had commanded humanity's last stand at Earth over 10,000 years earlier. His first words upon awakening were a question about the status of the evacuation fleet that had carried human refugees into exile. When told that his people had not only survived, but had become the saviors of galactic civilization, he simply nodded and asked, "What's our next mission?" Hayes's question summarized the human approach to their new role in galactic society. They had awakened as legends, fought as gods of war, and emerged as something new, a species that could protect your peace through their mastery of conflict. The galaxy was safer, because humans were no longer just legends but living guardians of a civilization that had learned to value both strength and wisdom. The story of humanity's awakening became the foundation for a new era of galactic history. Children of every species learned about the humans who had slept for thousands of years and awakened to save the galaxy from an ancient enemy. But the real lesson wasn't about human military superiority. It was about the importance of preparation, sacrifice, and the willingness to fight for principles worth preserving. In the end, humans had proven that the greatest warriors are those who fight not for conquest, but for the right of all species to live in peace. They had awakened as gods of war and chosen to become guardians of peace, ensuring that the galaxy would never again face the kind of existential threat that had once driven them into exile among the stars.